There's a ceiling on your conversion rate. It's not your price, it's not your copy, it's not your forms. And when I tell you what it is, you might roll your eyes and shrug. But it's eating your website from the inside out. This is something that Google is keenly focused on. It's causing your SEO to atrophy. It's causing your paid search placement to drop. It's causing your visitors to bounce. And it's only getting worse as mobile traffic grows. Now, I hate hearing that people have the attention span of a goldfish. It's not true. But even a goldfish has a limited attention span when staring at a blank screen on her little goldfish phone. Welcome to Intended Consequences, a podcast from Conversion Sciences. I'm Brian Massey, and I believe that anyone is capable of using behavioral science to predict the success of their marketing campaigns. Marketing magic is real, and I'll teach you how to harness it.
There is a lot of small things, a lot of immediate quick wins, a lot of things that you can do to change how you load different various files for your page that you can do in order to increase page speed.
So what is the ceiling on your conversion rate? It may be your page load time. Now, before you shrug this off as an IT problem, listen to my guest, Lukas Haensch. He's the founder of Pathmonk, but his company doesn't have anything to do with optimizing website performance. However, he used to be on the performance analysis team for none other than Google. Considering that Google is so important to your marketing efforts, I think you should listen to what he has to say. Ask him to bring load time down to a level that we can all understand. We talk about how to diagnose our site and some tactics to ask our tech team to implement to break through this performance ceiling. Let's listen to what Lukas has to say.
So I was part of the mobile optimization team, which is an internal team that was supporting Google's clients, advertising clients, in optimizing their mobile sites. Number one, from a page speed optimization angle, and number two, from user experience angle, sharing best practices with the team. But a heavy focus on the team has always been to help teams to reduce page speed, right? And there has been a lot of reasons why those teams or this team exists in Google in Europe, in the US, basically around the world. And one of the reasons being, obviously, that more and more searches happen on mobile, right? It's a large percentage and it's growing by day. And a lot of businesses that I'm talking today with actually have by far, exceeded the 50% mark of mobile traffic versus the desktop traffic.
It was in 2013 or 2014, I think, that internet-wide mobile searches exceeded desktop searches. It's been quite a while.
Exactly. That's interesting. It is actually, I recently thought about this. It seems that the topic gets more attention sort of like this year, especially in the last couple of months, but we've been on that, obviously for quite a long time, and mobile phones have been around for quite a long time. And the reason being, searches increase on mobile, people land on mobile websites, but conversion rates on mobile sites traditionally have been significantly lower than on desktop pages, right? And there's obviously now a whole group of reasons that are affecting this, right? It might be the user behavior, people coming very short stints. We call that micro moments within Google. People coming, I think, about 150 times per day back to their phone, and they spend very short snippets of time where they then interact on the phone. Another reason being page speed, right? There has been this famous quote on how Amazon is, increasing or decreasing their revenue by huge amounts just because of a few milliseconds of page load, but obviously sort of, in a lesser scale that also translates over to other types of businesses and other smaller businesses with less traffic. So I think the overall wave of more users using mobile phones to search, hence landing on mobile pages, but conversion rates not necessarily performing as strong on mobile, which also has a knock-on effect on, on their willingness to spend on AdWords for mobile, is probably one of the reasons why our team existed, to educate the developer space, to help our clients back then to, improve their mobile pages, to then be able to offer better experiences.
Well, the other trend that I've had my eye on, and it's going to remove some of the excuses we have, is that there is a growing population of people who are mobile only. In other words, they don't have a laptop or a desktop at work. They do all of their internet transacting on mobile, and that's growing. Currently, that's usually at a lower socioeconomic level in the United States, and as people are joining the internet in more developing countries, they're jumping in with a small screen handset as opposed to any sort of a laptop or a desktop. So we can't blame mobile, small screen, short attention span, the fact that people are standing in lines. For this segment of visitors, we need to be delivering a different mobile experience for them, and performance is a piece of that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's actually one thing that ties into this, what you were just saying there is, given the socioeconomic sort of structure of this group of people that you were just describing, there's also a wide range of different types of the devices being in play when they're coming to your website, right? Which means, actually back then, what is it now, about 2.5 years ago, when we had sort of a major focus on that in our team, we were always testing still in 3G, right? 3G fast, which by the time you could have argued to say, okay, why don't you guys test on 4G, right? 4G is around, but taking into consideration that a lot of the visitors on mobile don't necessarily have the high-end phones, don't necessarily have that 5G connection today to visit your page, is something that is a reality of probably a large percentage of the visitors. So even within our team in Google, we were always sort of testing on a little bit slower network than you would say, what you would say potentially would be the current one, but that's just the large amount of users being actually on slower connections.
And I'll invite our listeners to do this right now. Turn off Wi-Fi and pick up your phone, turn off Wi-Fi on it, and surf to your website and see, even if you've got a 4G or an LTE connection, unless you're standing right under the tower, your speeds are probably not going to be full 4G, maybe fast 3G or 3G, and see if you can tell the difference. This is the first step, I think, to understanding this phenomenon. So what I wanted to do was to talk about performance and understand a little bit specifically about the sorts of things that you were looking at. What are the common mistakes? What are the first things that we look at when we say, okay, we need to make our mobile or even our desktop site snappier?
So I would say, if I could put this into one theme, it would be that I think a lot of teams that I've been seeing and meeting is there is a very quick reaction, to optimize the content delivery network, to optimize infrastructure, right? To look into those big tasks in order to improve performance. I think there is a good reason to look at this. But what we've been actually finding in our team back then is there is a lot of small things, a lot of immediate quick wins, a lot of things that you can do to change how you load different various files for your page that you can do in order to increase page speed, right? I will go into this like a little bit in a second. Basically, I'd say the concept of the critical rendering path is something that is sometimes, a little bit overlooked. The critical rendering
path. That's new. That's a new term for me. And I just want to make sure that, so when you talk about kind of the big things, you're talking about making sure you're on a good host, making sure you have a good CDN for delivering content that doesn't change, and having a CMS or a content delivery system that works well with the stack that your host is using. We're gonna kind of let you go off, as listeners, go off and do those sorts of things and really focus on some of the more tactical. I don't want to call them smaller because they can have big effects.
Exactly, but that's exactly the theme. That's what I'm saying. There is those bigger things that you can do. You can do them once or twice, but then there is also not that many things that you can do. While on the actual resources that you're loading for your page, every file potentially has some room for improvement. Might it be your font files? Might it be your CSS that you're loading? The different JavaScript files that you're loading? All the images that you're loading? Each of them in itself have the potential to be improved on various different ways. And that's sort of the way how we were thinking about this in our team. And going back to the critical rendering path, really. But I think maybe one thing to think about is important is, what is really a good metric to think about speed, right? Because there's different ones. There is the overall load time until the page is complete, loaded, right? Which is all the assets. There is first bytes when is the first byte loaded? When does it start rendering? When is it fully loaded? Or, and that's what we looked at within our team Google, is the speed index. It's a metric that has been used within the company extensively, and it's basically a representation of how long it takes until your content above the fold is fully painted, right? Until your first screen at the very top is meaningful, until a person can see what's the key message, what's the key action I can take. And sort of focusing on this is what gives you a very sort of, I would say, narrow, but also clear focus on what to improve on, which files to improve on, to make sure that this first screen renders as quick as possible.
Now, help me understand a little bit. I just wanted to understand a little bit. How does a measurement tool know when the above the fold elements have all been painted? Is it mapping the window size at some point, or taking some sort of an average?
Yeah, so it's basically doing a calculation on when each of the pixels are being filled in that sense. There is some deeper mathematics going in there, which I have to be very honest, I cannot give you the full breakdown on how this calculation is being done. But ultimately, there's actually a nice formula on this. If you guys check out the webpage test.org, which is actually a Google in-house made testing tool that provides you with the speed index, there is the exact mathematical formula being provided as well. I can't recall that on the top of my head right now, to be honest. But ultimately, it is a calculation that tries to figure out when is that first screen above the fold being painted.
So we love webpagetest.org. I had no idea Google developed that. They don't have any of their branding on it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's an official Google tool. It's made by Googlers.
By Googlers. Got it. Now, so will they use the terminology speed index? I don't remember seeing that on the web page test reports that we get.
It's within the reports. It's one of the metrics, and it's just called speed index. When there, it's usually you would see a speed index, let's say, of 4,000 when your page when your above the fold content would be painted within 4 seconds, right? So it's basically giving you a breakdown that is, if you have 2.3 seconds, it's going to be 2,300 is your speed index.
So critical rendering path, what is that, and how does it play in this?
Yeah, so since we just established in the conversation that the speed index, or I just call it, that you have rendered everything that is above the fold, that this is really critical. Now you have to think about what is the path that the browser has to go through in order to be able to paint that first screen, right? To fully paint that first screen. And that path is basically the critical rendering path. Everything that has to be downloaded and executed and then to be rendered on the screen until we see the first page to be completed. And there is now basically, you have to think that a lot of the assets that you're loading, such as JavaScript or CSS, by default are render blocking, right? So until they are not fully downloaded and executed, they will be blocking the rendering path, which means nothing can be painted on the screen, which means your page loads later, which means your speed index increases. So basically, the approach that we would have been taking is to go step by step through the critical rendering path. All the assets that are being loaded before a screen gets painted, and figure out how can we optimize those to load the above the fold content quicker and to then by that decrease the speed index.
Yeah, let's make sure everybody's level set on our terminology here. So CSS file, this is the cascading style sheet. This tells the browser how to paint things, which fonts to use. Actually, you can control a lot with it. You can control whether things appear or not, where they appear on the page. A very powerful primarily a formatting tool. And then JavaScript goes in and can also move things around, can set up triggers. And for instance, we use it to communicate with our analytics package. We use it to communicate with our A/B testing tools and things like that. And the CSS file is typically one giant file. So when you say it's render blocking, we have to wait for CSS to load because otherwise the browser doesn't know how to paint things. And since it's usually a large file, that can be pretty significant. That can be a big penalty.
Exactly. You're starting to point exactly in the right direction, which is which assets are being loaded, such as a huge CSS file, right? Or some heavy JavaScript that is actually not being needed for any actions that you can actually do above the fold. Which of them are being loaded, hence blocking the rendering path, but are actually not needed immediately. So that would be one way to think about the critical rendering path. If I take the example of CSS, which would be a little bit more of a complex task, but what is definitely possible is to extract the critical CSS. To extract the CSS that is basically used for that first screen that we've been talking about, and load only that critical CSS inline, so it basically gets pulled immediately, and then you can load other parts of the CSS later.
So you would advocate having perhaps a separate CSS file, and you can have as many of these CSS files as you want, having a separate CSS file that just has the rendering instructions for the above the fold content.
Yeah, you can even go one step further, which would be inlining, because you can just use those style comments and inline them at the very beginning, which means they're going to be shown at the very beginning. So they're not even a file that has to be requested. So that would be even one step further.
I see. So it's loaded with the HTML as opposed to as a separate CSS file. Very interesting. Okay.
Exactly. This is obviously quite an investigative task to do, but definitely has been done and has been done by companies we've been working with back then. But that's one way, right? That's one way to look at what are the files that are big, that are loading at the very beginning and that are blocking my rendering path. JavaScript is the same, right? If you now think about, give you one more example there, an example that has been occurring a lot is carousels. Right, those nice carousels that you.
I'm glad you brought this up. This is my pet peeve.
I mean, there is a lot of usability issues with carousels on the one side, anyways, right? And I'm sure you've been educating your listenership quite a bit about this, but there's also a performance aspect about a carousel, because if you look onto a carousel from a pure performance perspective, what is it? It is JavaScript, it's render blocking, and it is usually 5 to 6 pictures. Loading, sometimes 4 pictures loading. And obviously a picture, if it's not optimized, which is happening in a lot of cases, now what has to be happening in order so that the first screen is fully ready is the carousel JavaScript has to load, plus 4, 5, or 6 images have to load, right? Which can take, depending on the size, it can easily take 8 seconds, 10 seconds sometimes to get those images up. So I would say the carousel has been, if I can recall correctly, has been probably one of the biggest sort of enemies to performance optimization on mobile, because they don't have a lot of usability benefit, right? So you don't have a benefit usually on the one side due to banner blindness and many other things that you can argue from a UX perspective. But on the other end, it was also hindering performance quite a bit.
Well, in our tests, we find that it's similar to what we see on search results pages, that you do not want to be on page 2, even though it sounds awesome that you're ranking number 12 or number 13, because the number of clicks you get just craters. And it's the same with the carousel. Whatever you show first is what's important. It almost doesn't matter what it really doesn't matter what the trailing 3 or 4 or 5 are. I think in the market, what I'm seeing is that I think we've left the realm of the carousel. I see fewer and fewer sites that have these carousels on them. It was all the rage 3 or 4 years ago. Every template required a carousel, but I am seeing these background videos are now taking that place on the hero area. So these are large, full width videos, and you often see them playing on mobile too. Are those equally as dangerous?
One small back loop I wanted to make on the images at the top of the flow, but talking about videos, right? Again, you have to think about what does a video require to be able to play on your page, right? It requires a player. There is some JavaScript involved. So what we've been doing back then is, on rare occasions though, I have to admit, if you want to optimize around the video, one thing could be to sort of, load. Sort of the idea is lazy loading, right? If you don't have to display a certain resource immediately, you could load it on demand, right? So let's say you have a video on the page, not necessarily talking now about the background videos, more a video that was sitting, in a player to describe the product, for example. And you would have a video like that on your page. And in many, many cases, the user will not click that video, right? Or a certain percentage at least. But everybody has to be loading it, has to be loading the JS that is required for the player, for example, and which affects, again, critical rendering path, which again reduces the performance. So one way there could be to sort of give a representation of what that can be done through images and design work to, for example, show what the video would be looking like, and then basically on click load the player and the JS for that. And all of that, because very often the video might not even sit above the fold. It might be sitting 3 or 4 slides down, right? But you're already loading that JavaScript, and maybe not everybody's actually using that video. So finding a way to lazy load, so basically load on demand those video files and the JS required can be one way to reduce that.
And we're seeing that capability built into at least the Enfold template that we use on our website. Our SEO is actively working to use their player, which does this lazy loading. And you also wanted to put a button on your carousel discussion.
Yeah, so and it ties into the video because you talked about background videos, right? And which very often sort of, under an opacity layer play in the background and show some scenery. Probably that works really well on desktop. What I would personally suggest from my experience in the field is really, really prioritizing that first page load. Speed index, we talked about that, which means you could load on mobile, not that video in the background, but an image that represents, a similar scenario. You wouldn't necessarily have to load the JavaScript in the player to basically run the video. You potentially could just load an image that represents something very similar, because everything is a trade-off, right? So if you're loading much slower now on 3G, for example, or 4G, because you have that player, that video you're running, potentially much less people will actually see it. So another way to think about this could be, okay, let's take an image and try to figure out the best way to load that one image the fastest. Okay, we talked about carousels. That's probably not the way because, again, we require, if it's not a pure CSS carousel, we would need a JavaScript for that in most cases. But what we can do is, for example, if we take an image, we could base 64 an image. Base 64 encoding means you take an image, you put it through a converter, and your image now turns into a long line of code. And that long line of code you can, again, implement into your HTML at the very beginning, which means your image now gets pushed with the very, very first request, not after some CSS, not after some JavaScript, not after your player would be ready from the background video, but with the very first request and immediately shown on the screen, which, definitely has an impact on how quickly you're able to paint the first screen, especially if it's, image heavy, your first screen, if it's a huge background image, for example.
And so I think our listeners could Google base 64. It's usually written as BASE 64, all one word without a space, and find a tool that would allow that could upload a video or upload an image and get the
image.
Yeah, so an image, and then they download what is basically a character version of that. So it's what they get back looks like a text file with a bunch of gibberish on it.
Exactly. You just drop that in there, you get converted, and that's something you can then place into your HTML, especially helpful if your first paint has a huge background image, which I would say 80% of all the websites that I've ever seen have.
So we've talked about this critical rendering path. I know from using webpage test.org that they often will recommend delaying execution of JavaScript. So there's the penalty of loading the JavaScript if you have a load JavaScript on the side. And there is also the penalty of executing it where it needs to finish executing before you can call the page loaded. So I actually don't know how to delay JavaScript. So I would be interested in hearing from you what that means.
Okay, so basically you have to think that JavaScript blocks the critical rendering path. Hence, you will get penalties, basically, and like not physical penalties, but hence it will be, affecting your page speed. So JavaScript is parser blocking, you would say, in the correct terms, and that means if you have an HTML, if you have to think about how the browser is actually sort of working through all of the information that it's getting from your page, there is the HTML parsing happening, right? And only after this is finished, the DOM, which is sort of your representation of the page, can be actually created. It's called the render tree. So, but I will put the terms a little bit aside. The essence is your JavaScript is blocking that rendering path. Now, there's a couple of simple ways actually to delay the load of your JavaScript. And obviously, you would have to check each of the files that you are loading there, because some are very critical, but some might not be very critical, such as something that is, somewhere in the checkout process, for example. It's going to take a couple of seconds, if not minutes, until somebody is actually getting there. So what you could be doing, simply put, is you can load JavaScript code asynchronously, which means you add async to your script file, which means that the JavaScript will be basically downloaded next to the parsing. So it will not block your HTML parsing, and from only in the execution time will it block the parsing. There's even a second version which is called deferring JavaScript, which is, again, it's just one tag. You write your script for the JavaScript and you add script defer, which means that the JavaScript will be downloaded but not executed, because this is when it starts blocking the rendering, which means, JavaScript that you don't actually need at the very beginning. You could either async or defer, hence loading after the first paint is being done on the screen, and then actually loading them.
So it's that easy. Literally typing async as part of your JavaScript tag, or defer. And I've never seen defer before. I didn't realize it was quite that simple. Now, some of our JavaScript, as you said, is mission critical. So we want to make sure that our tag manager runs first and foremost. We want to make sure that time critical analytics calls get run first, so that that page view is recorded before the visitor. We don't want it delayed because the visitor could navigate away before we realize they've been on that page. And also in the tools that we use, especially things like A/B testing tools, there is usually a different set of code or a checkbox that we can use to load those tags synchronously or asynchronously. And depending on what we're changing on the page, that can help us manage things like Flash and whatnot. So, all right. So this is, even though we're talking about JavaScript, this is fairly straightforward for most of us to understand, I think.
Yeah, at least the concept, right? But then when you go implementation, you have to obviously check each of the different files. As you said, some might be mission critical. You have to treat them potentially a little bit different. I think the quick wins are always those JavaScript files that just load with some JavaScript that is not required in the first couple of seconds, but will be required later. You also mentioned tools and tags. What we've been seeing again and again, and I think it's really worth it to do a review for every website owner, a lot of tools and snippets being loaded. Sometimes it's A/B testing tools, but actually sort of the experiments are not being run. It's a very simple thing to do. It's no high-level page speed optimization, but having a quick look on whether all the tags that are being run are actually being used with a critical eye, and removing some of them can immediately have an impact on page speed.
Talk to us a little bit about what you've been doing since you left Google.
We talked a lot about optimization now, right? And how page speed affects conversion rates. But what I also learned is page speed optimization is not a holy grail to conversion rate optimization, right? I think it's a really, really important tool, but it's not the all end. You can improve your page speed, especially if you have sort of, limited amount of traffic, maybe not like Amazon in the millions. If you have limited amount of traffic, the page speed not magically increases your conversion rate. There can be some impact, and I think it's a really important tool. But what I learned in that time is there is a lot of other reasons why people would not be converting, right? And what we've been working on with my team is basically we work on an AI-driven conversion rate optimization tool. And the reason here is really what we identified is when a user is on a journey to make an important decision for a purchase, and they will be using their mobile phone in this. So let's talk about, for example, a university course as an example, a high-value product that somebody, it's a very important decision for them. And what we notice is people will come several times to the page for those important decisions.
It's what we call a considered purchase, where they're gonna make a decision over time because it's a large purchase, or there are more than one person involved in the purchase. So yes,
exactly. And a lot of products are this, like a lot of services, courses, software as a service. It can be something like this, cars, bigger decisions. And I think there's a very nice study by Google where it says that in order to buy a car, a user might go through 900 or more digital steps, right? Which is jumping between YouTube, search, the actual car dealership website, the brand's website.
900. Wow.
Yeah, it's a nice. It's a study done because it's a very long decision, right? It goes over a couple of months, if weeks, and the questions change, right? The questions that the user has will change. At the beginning, it's very fact-based, right? Is it the right size, the right price? How can I afford it? But it will merge into something like, how will I feel? Do our skis fit in the background of the car? So it will change the information that you're trying to figure out, and hence a lot of digital moments are being created. And what we're working on is in Pathmonk is to provide a mobile user as well as a desktop user, just that right nugget of information on the website when they're coming the first, second, third time, just providing them that little snippet of information that just might push their decision making further, or let them provide contact information, because a lot of companies out there face a conversion rate of 1.8% or lower, which means there is 98% of visitors coming to your page and don't ever leave their contact information. So that's something that we tackle.
When you get back to the office, if you aren't already excited to run a free web page test report on your site, I've got nothing for you. Visit webpagetest.org, enter the URL of your homepage, and see what grade you get. You can see the score for my site in the show notes. I'll share it with you. It's not perfect, but we've been working on this for most of the year. You'll get a score of A through F, like an English elementary school student. Then you'll see vast details of your site. One of my favorite tools is the film strip. It shows you what your visitors are seeing at specific intervals. It slows the load time process down for you. Now, about that page you're trying so hard to rank on Google search, is load time causing you a problem? Put the URL in and see. You may have to educate the rest of your team on things like speed index and critical rendering path, but now you're equipped, so go out and science something.